So, in this set of notes, we're going to see the United States has now won the Revolutionary War, but there is a perilous moment. There's a storm after the storm. And then we're going to see a question of rights and privileges, the direction of the government, and then the first Constitution of the United States called the Articles of Confederation. The picture you see there is of the American delegates, Franklin, Adams, and Jay, at the Treaty of Paris signing, but the British negotiators would not sit for the portrait with them, and so the portrait remains to this day unfinished. There are many that do not realize, but this nation actually came close to having a military coup soon after the Revolutionary War. The officers of the Continental Army called a secret meeting at Newburgh in 1783, north of New York City. And there they were listing their grievances, including a lack of pay during their service and the possibility that they were not going to get their pensions. That's very important that you make sure that your veterans get pensions. And so they had a circular letter calling the officers to meet at Newburgh, New York. And Washington was not invited to this meeting. But Washington heard of this, became enraged, and showed up anyway on March 15, 1783. And he literally excoriated his men, saying he had done nothing to earn this disrespect. His own conduct was above reproach. He had never left the army in 8 years during the Revolutionary War. While he was constantly granting them leaves to go home, he himself never went home. He said also that a secret meeting of officers of the Continental Army was an undignified exercise for the Continental Army, that they are the Continental Army. The Army stands for something important, and that starting a coup hurts them worse than anyone else. And he says that Congress means to do right by the men. And he takes out the letter that you see there in the picture. And in that letter, he begins to read it. But first he takes out his spectacles. And he says, "You'll excuse me, men, for not only have I gone gray in the service of my country, I've also gone blind." He had never taken out his spectacles and put them on in the presence of the men. When he does this, any thoughts of a coup break down right away, and the soldiers are incredibly remorseful and ask Washington's forgiveness, which he says, "I understand you're frustrated, but no one's more frustrated than I am. But we are the Continental Army, and we stand for something special here. And a military coup would just make us just another army on the face of this earth that tried to rise up and take over a nation." With the Newburgh conspiracy now put down, the nation now turns to getting its identity in order. And there are plenty of concerns in this nation. How will the nation protect the freedoms of religion, property, and speech that had been fought so hard for in the Revolutionary War? They will take legal reforms under advisement, such as entail on how property is distributed among the heirs to fortunes, and primogeniture, which means that the oldest son inherits everything. They would end all that. They would also enact social equality by having no hereditary titles such as Sir or Baron or Count or whatever, and exclusivity. This would be a nation that would not know social boundaries like this. The only social boundary would be one of wealth and ability. What about women in the nation? Women had well adapted during the war. They achieved a series of fundamental new rights. They had run the farms and run the businesses and shops while their husbands were away. When they come home, husbands expect things to go back to the way they were. That's not possible. There's also a growing underclass in this society. The growing underclass is making it very hard for the wealthy and the elites to simply ignore them. What about slaves? Many of the slaves opposed American independence. They felt that the Revolutionary War was more than anything designed to help protect slavery. Very few slaves joined the Continental Army. And after the Revolutionary War, many slaves said, if you're fighting for the right to say that all men are created equal, well then, what about us? There were also plenty of Americans who supported the British. They were loyalists. And many of them sought protection of the British and left with the British and fled to England, Canada, or the Caribbean. And with them, they took their wealth. They took their slaves. They took their properties. And this is a problem for the nation when it comes to economics. And Indians, of course. There are plenty of Indians in this new nation. What are we going to do with them? Many of them say enough is enough, and they move north to Canada. But the others stay, and they will be a problem. And many were wondering, what is the direction of the government? What is the government there to do? Is it there to help protect the ethic of America, the attraction of America, which was basically a nation that was open to those seeking refuge from the oppression of monarchies and the constrictions of aristocracy? It's a nation of tremendous opportunity for those coming in. And the government needs to be able to keep that opportunity alive. But the nation has problems. There's a massive debt from the war. 3 important words: wars cost money. Secondly, there's a fundamental argument between states and the new nation. The states believe themselves to be the ultimate authority in their realm. They do not believe in a higher national government telling them what to do. The higher national government was there just simply to protect them. There's also a new breed of politician coming into the arena, men who were not as cultured, not as elite as the Washingtons and the Adamses and the Hamiltons and so forth. These are men who came from new wealth, and they are very populist in some ways. They are representing the people. The Continental Congress loses both members in power because Continental Congress constantly was in session. There was no recess or anything. And many of the members of the Continental Congress leave and go join their state governments because they believe the state governments was where it really got done. And you have sectional rivalries. The coast versus the backcountry, the large states versus the small states, and now you're starting to see a rivalry growing between North and South. The first government of the United States of America operated under a constitution that was known as the Articles of Confederation, which essentially was from 1783 until 1787. And what is very important to understand is that the Articles of Confederation were a form of government that most people approved of. More approved of it than disapproved of it. That's crucial to understanding. But the Articles are far from perfect. The Articles called for a very weakened national government. It did not resolve the nature of the relationship of the government to the states. Essentially, it was an alliance treaty more than anything. It showed that the states were all aligned in a nation, but the national government was there to protect them, deliver the mail, and stay out of the way. In some ways, the Articles of Confederation resemble more the NATO Charter than any constitution, so to speak. The Articles had imperfect language. It required unanimous consent for amendments, which meant that small states such as Rhode Island, for instance, could gum up the works to change the Articles. The Articles had no taxing power for Congress. Therefore, they're unable to collect on bills from the states. You could send the states a bill for services, but the states could ignore it or simply say, we're not going to pay it. They were unable to prevent the Spanish or English encroachment from the North and the South. And that is a big problem. If the government's not able to protect the borders, it's not a very good government. It's unable to regulate commerce between the states. The states are starting to put their own tariffs on trade with each other. And more than anything, they're unable to relieve the post-war depression. The Articles is just simply not up to the task of doing this. But the Articles despite all this, people like it. They actually like that situation. They like a weak government because that means it won't interfere with their individual liberties. Here you see the copy of the articles, almost faded away now, but that is there in the National Archives of the United States in Washington, D.C., that you can go and see. Still on display. The reason it faded is that they had put the copy between two sheets of glass and pressed it, and the ink would leach onto the glass and off the paper. Now they suspend the paper between two sheets of glass without actually touching the glass. The Articles of Confederation do get things done. The actions of the national government are some positive aspects. They ratify the Treaty of Paris in 1784, guaranteeing the nation's borders. They send John Adams to Britain to negotiate a trading treaty with the British. And they pass Jefferson's Ordinance of Religious Freedom, allowing people from the extremes of Catholicism and Judaism to the more mainline Protestant to the more radical Protestants to simply exist without any taxation or oppression. The most important thing that the Articles government passes is the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This is the first major organization of the territories between the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, and the Great Lakes. All those original 13 states had claimed that territory. Now the Articles pass a law saying that those territories are now the property of the national government. They abolish the states' claims to the territory and say, when the population of a territory reaches 60,000, they can apply for admission to the Union as a new state, and they would divide and subdivide the land appropriately. In those territories, there would be the abolition of slavery, the establishment of civil rights, and the Native Americans that still lived there were given privileges and protected from land grabs. So here you see the Northwest Territory and the states that it eventually would include. Now, not included in here are the states of Pennsylvania and Maryland. That's not part of the Northwest Territory. But actually, the Northwest Ordinance called for surveyors to survey the lines that separated states. And Pennsylvania and Maryland had a border dispute, and so they sent two surveyors named Mason and Dixon to survey the line, and that's how the Mason-Dixon line came to be. Despite the achievements of the Articles were soon doomed when New York blocked an impost duty of the national government. And this meant that the states were now defying the national government. And the elites grew tired of all the constant bickering in Congress under the Articles. Meanwhile, the South grew impatient with the North because of the loss of trade with Britain. Adams was not getting it done because the details of the treaty was constantly being changed by the Congress. And so up steps James Madison in 1787. He's 36 years old at the time, a very close associate of Jefferson, a graduate of Princeton, and he observes that the states are too self-serving. They need to be controlled, and that common men are taking over the legislatures and leveling. What that means is they are taxing wealth to such a degree to redistribute wealth downward toward the lower classes. Now that is okay, but only to a certain point. After a while, the wealthy and the elites are going to try and start hiding their money and shutting down businesses and so forth. Furthermore, the states were printing their own paper money, which was leading to rampant inflation. And so what happens? Madison says we need to have a balanced government. We need to balance the power of the states with the power of the federal government. And not only should the federal government and the states be balanced against each other, the federal government itself should be balanced, or the national government should be balanced.